One person who feels he's lived a full and abundant life is John Bradford. And John joins me today in the studio. Welcome, John. It's good to have you.
Thank you very much, Keith. I can't do much for your haircut.
Do you know, I wasn't going to say that, and I thought to myself, you've got John here.
Yeah, I like your haircut anyway.
John, you've written this book, you gave it the title Abundant Life, but that's not a triumphalist title. It's about the fullness of life and what you've discovered. Tell us a little bit about what it means to you.
Yeah, I'd like to do that, Keith. But could I first say how much I admire the work that you do, and I knew your predecessor, the late Gordon Moyes, very well, and even remember Alan Walker when I was growing up. But look, yeah, I wondered about the title, although it's based on Jesus' word in John chapter 10, verse 10, where he said he came that we would have life and that we would have it abundantly. But I've never understood that to mean anything about being wealthy. I mean, I'm not a part of the name it and claim it brigade by any means, but it's more about having a full life, a meaningful life, and I think the Christian life is exactly that, and that's what it's been for me.
Look, and I've read the book, and your life's had many components to it, hasn't it? The military aspect to it.
I've had about 8 careers, if you want. People think I'm a bit restless, if you want to put it that way.
And in that life, what are some of the things that the realm of politics for many people would be a challenging one, attaching the Christian faith to political life. How do you tie all that together in you?
Well, you know, I went into the army at a young age. I was conscripted straight out of university, and of course, as you said, I ended up in Vietnam as a part of that. But look, friends told me early on, nail your colours to the mast, you know. Make sure people know where you stand. And I found when I went into local government, on the Shire Council out in Northern Beaches, and then into the federal parliament, that was the same thing. I mean, you had to know what you were there for. And I went to Canberra fully believing that God had sent me there for a purpose, and I wasn't going to let him down.
And since then, you not only did you do that, you went then to, and I think your movement from Canberra, which was a very different part of the world.
Well, we went, so I finished in the Parliament at the end of 1998, where I actually left the Liberal Party late in my career and went off with Fred Niles' party, the Christian Democratic Party, and led their Senate team in Queensland. We were unsuccessful. It's a long story. It's a whole chapter in my book, but Pauline Hanson was running Rife at the time, and we were up against that. But anyway, look, I was finished in the Parliament, so, you know, you're a rooster one day and a feather duster the next, I can tell you. But I went to the Bible Society and said, well, look, you guys do a good job. What can I do for you? And they offered me a job. And I said, that's great. I said, where? And they told me about it. I said, that's me. I can do that. They said, it's in Mongolia. So I said, well, where's Mongolia? Anyway, long story short, I went home and told Judy the good news was I had a job. The bad news, to the extent it was it was in Mongolia. So we pulled our kids out of school. They were 14, 12 and 6 at the time, and went to live in Ulaanbaatar.
And look, and let's just open that up, because in a way it was good news, wasn't it, really, in the end?
Well, because it was part of God's plan. I mean, we were there for an important purpose. So the Bible Society was having some problems with its translation team, with relations with the government, a whole lot of things that Bible societies do very well around the world, but they were struggling in Mongolia. Again, it's a whole chapter in the book, but it brought our family together. For the 9 years I was in the federal parliament, our 2 older kids, I was away from probably 30 weeks of the year. I mean, it's almost a weekly commute. And then, of course, as a federal MP, you're travelling around the country, you're going on overseas delegations. So we were thrust together into Ulaanbaatar, into a little apartment, heated, fortunately, most of the time. And I guess I got to know my kids. And the younger one, of course, Lisa, has grown up with me more. So it was a great time for our family.
And there's a danger, as you've said early on, about seeing abundant life as being that, you know, whatever goes, you can have it. But the reality is that life has had its challenges. I mean, if you'd be willing to talk about the challenges really of the last 6 months in your own life. Yeah,
I'm happy to talk about him, Keith. I wasn't 6 months ago when we were first planning to do this interview, because our son Timothy was diagnosed back then with a fairly aggressive form of cancer. And in that 6 months, I've come to understand I've learned probably a lot more about life in general in this past 6 months than I'd learned in the previous 69 years of my life. And we've had to cope as a family with a very challenging situation, but we've come to trust God. I mean, we'd always trusted God, but when you've got this sort of a crisis on your hands, you live with it 24/7, and at the moment our son is receiving treatment in the Gold Coast University Hospital, very good treatment. We thank God for the doctors and nurses there, but it's been a hard time for our family.
How important is faith then in the middle of all this?
Well, we've got nowhere else to go. I mean, I'm like Job. I feel like Job, and Job came to the point where he said, well, Though he slay me, I will trust him. The 3 young Hebrew men stood before the fiery furnace and said to Nebuchadnezzar, our God's going to save us. And Nebuchadnezzar smirked as he heated up the furnace. And you know the story from Daniel 3 very well. But in the end, they said, but if he doesn't, we still have faith in him. So we've come to understand that dimension of faith that maybe we hadn't experienced before. And a lot of good's come out of Tim's illness, a lot of Christian friends who gathered around him, and it's been a time of great growth for him, and I think for my wife and I and our other kids as well.
And the life to the fullness, the abundant life, is knowing that God is in there with you, irrespective of what's happening to you, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think it's important that people understand that the Christian life was never promised. It wasn't promised as an easy way to go. In fact, I think if we read the whole, put the John 10:10, the abundant life verse, in context, I think we understand that the Christian life isn't going to be easy. I mean, we're going to be persecuted. We're not promised good health necessarily. There's lots of challenges along the way. We've been fortunate. I've been very fortunate to have had a blessed life.
What would you say to somebody listening to this conversation who might have an issue to face, either similar or something that feels like a big obstacle, too hard to tackle? What would you say to them?
Look, I'd point them to the book of Job. It's the most remarkable book. I've alluded to it already. But look, Job couldn't understand why he was suffering, and he wasn't able to understand because he just simply didn't have the big picture. He couldn't see what was going on behind the scenes, and nor can we. But we do know that we have a God who is loving and compassionate and merciful. And I would say to anybody that's got a challenge in front of them, give it to God. Talk to God about it. Hand it over to God, and he'll take care of it.
And when you have around your loving family and friends, that all makes that even more supportive, doesn't it?
Well, we're fortunate to have a close family. My wife's been a wonderful support for the more than 30 years we've been married. She was great when our kids were younger and I was away most of the time. She continues to be a servant to our son. She was just massaging his feet in the hospital last night when we were over there. So, yeah, my family's fantastic and I love them dearly.
Bless you, and thank you for coming on the show and being willing to share from your heart. Don't hesitate to write in if you have any questions that have emerged from our conversation, particularly about some of these difficult things. At Wesley Mission, we don't believe in turning them aside and avoiding them. We might be able to provide contact, helps, people who might be able to offer counsel and support at difficult times. Don't forget you can watch this and past episodes of Wesley Impact on the Wesley Mission website, wesleymission.org.au. And you can send me an email on impacttv@wesleymission.org.au. And please do join us for another episode of Wesley Impact soon. And don't forget, we have a special show on Christmas Day. All that to come in the coming weeks. Thank you and God bless you very much. See you next week.